Welcome, everyone, to the Agile and Government Without the Tears panel discussion. This is the coronavirus edition, so not only will there be no tears shed in today's session, there'll be no coughing, sneezing, or bodily fluids exchange of any kind. And I promise that's the only corona joke I will make. Please don't throw your hand sanitizer at me. My name is Matt Thompson. I'm an instructor at Civic Hall Toronto and a frequent collaborator with Code for Canada. And I also call myself a teamologist. I'm obsessed with this question of how teams can work smarter together, what makes teams happier, healthier, and more effective. That's what brings me to this topic and why I'm so excited to introduce today's panelists to you. I'm excited to learn from some of their case studies and examples and expertise. I'm sure you'll learn a lot from them as well. In a moment, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Sarah Brown. We're going to hold question and answer to the end. Each speaker will present for about 12 minutes, and then hopefully we'll have a bit of time after the presentations to do some question and answer. So let's introduce our first speaker, Sarah Brown. Her pronouns are she and her. Yeah, let's hear it for Sarah. She is the team lead and senior product manager at the Ontario Digital Service. Sarah started her product career managing the design and development of children's activity toys. She then moved to educational software development, leading teams to design and build game-based online learning platforms for elementary students and educators. She is currently leading a team at the ODS to design and build new online vehicle services. So please welcome Sarah Brown.
Is it all set up? Where's the... All right. There it is. Vehicle services. So how many of folks in the room here were at the talk that Katie gave this morning on from the ODS? So not too many. So a little bit of context then. So this initiative it sort of kicked off with last year's budget announcement, top 10 transactions, sort of a transformation type project. Soon after that, we were connected with so this announcement came out from Ministry of Transportation highlighting this digital dealership registration, and we got connected with the Service Ontario team who had been digging into this for the last kind of, almost 20 years. Their subject matter expert joined our team because it was identified that dealerships do the bulk of the registration services that our team was tasked with. And so I'm leading a team, or I'm leading a product team, dealing with tackling 4 of those top 10 transactions, one of which we've kind of deprioritized for the next year or so. And so we're tackling 3 that are currently not online at all. So the other teams are kind of iterating on things that exist in the online space. Our team is developing something that is net new. And so, is there a way to make this? I guess I could look at that one. So I just wanted to touch on kind of the Agile, sort of the core Agile values being, starting with users, so outside in, change being a constant and responding to that change, getting a working software out the door, and the team and interactions across the team. And the rest of the 11 and change minutes I have left, maybe 10 and a half, will just kind of highlight how we've done that. This process of this sort of cycle and living these values is not super new to me. As Matt mentioned, have kind of launched a couple of products with TVO and in the private sector, and before that in the toy space. But each project is new. There's always kind of new dynamics and new and just differences within the ecosystem. And this one is really fun. It's got a lot of complexity to it. One of the pieces we learned early in the game is that these vehicle registrations, so in Ontario and in many parts of the province and in the world, a vehicle needs to be registered. So a vehicle needs to be registered with the province. We know what that vehicle is. And an ownership a permit needs to be attached to the vehicle and to the plate. And so this currently in Ontario, the plate, the permit, and the license plate are, they're tangible things. And so we're developing this online service, but we have a fulfillment piece of the equation. And that actual fulfillment piece didn't really kind of twig to us until we were kind of like 6 weeks into the thing. We're like, ooh, we gotta get things into the hands of people. And so we started with, this is kind of the team we started with. So myself, our UX lead, and that Service Ontario subject matter expert. We were connected with a Ministry of Transportation product owner, a tech lead, so an architect lead was identified also at MTO, and at the ODS. So that was kind of our core team. Only 3 of us were committed full-time, and those other sort of support folks are very available and continue to be so, but also on other projects. And then we expanded. So I'll sort of give you a sense of what that time frame looks like over the last year. But now our core team is 9 strong. We scaled up on our development side. So we've got a Scrum lead now, 2 front-end developers, and a back-end. And we did have co-ops, we actually did have a co-op and an intern through most of the last year, and they've been fantastic. We've since brought on a lean lead, and we'll touch a little bit on that, and we have another content person who kind of bumps in and out of the team. I did want to touch on the digital service standard. It's sort of a key pillar in terms of what we do. This is a real benefit, to be honest, in terms of working in the public space, having access to this document or these pillars, this guidance. It does make conversations with stakeholders and kind of why we're doing and what we're doing easier. It facilitates kind of makes sense of our approach. And just highlighting here these 2 pieces. So establish the right team and be agile and user-centered are in that service standard. The establish the right team, our leadership at the ODS has just been, they're superstars. I think everyone's obviously familiar with Hillary, but there's other key people. So Dara is our product chapter lead, and has really gone to bat for us in terms of getting the right people in place to be able to allow us to get the velocity that we have over the past year. And so this is what we've been doing. We started in around April of last year. We spent 8 months in discovery. Some of the team last night, so the Code for Canada fellows mentioned there, talk to 100 people in 100 days kind of thing, and that is the way to do it. And so, I think some of the folks on the team were a little taken aback at the sort of the intensity of that effort, but it really allowed us to get sort of baseline of understanding of the landscape internally. So a ton of just conversations from audit through to fulfillment, investigators with Ministry of Transportation, real breadth of understanding around the space, and also our user research, which I'll touch on, is obviously a critical piece to that. And then around in the fall, we started to transition into alpha. I'll talk a bit about what that looks like, and now we're in alpha, but we've got a real sightline to beta readiness, is what we're sort of like tracking to. And so these are dealership interviews, just a couple of pictures there. We visited 3 on their premises, so in situ. There's one there, it's a high volume dealership. Then we had a whole series of interviews to try, give us an understanding of the space and the different kind of business models. And that was a whole powerful series of interviews and activities related to that. I'm going to sort of go a little bit quickly here because I was timed at 15 minutes and now I've only got 12 last night. So I'm going to blast through this a little bit. Usability testing we've actually just done recently, so I was kind of bookending the year with these 2 user research sets of activities. We did have a series of there's other conversations that popped up through the year as people wanted to get in touch with us through various channels. But usability testing most recently, so as we get into the coding phase, really wanted to get a sense of how dealerships are interacting with what we've proposed, and starting to get some good feedback, and we'll just kind of continue that usability testing and development cycle as the year continues. These touched on the team interactions, and really, I think there's a couple of examples that came up today, right? Clementine spoke earlier about the power of getting people in the room together and solving problems in real time. It makes all the difference. To just these whiteboarding sessions, the velocity with which you kind of you figure out a problem or you surface kind of, we didn't really hadn't figured that out. This has been critical to our momentum for sure. And this is so apologize a little bit for this slide, because it is not intended to be a quick get, but the reason for including this is that, our stakeholder management piece is a key piece of the equation, right? And sometimes, and because we're in government, this level of the briefing piece is not kind of inconsequential, and I only have 5 minutes left. And so we put this together to try and to put some, to explain kind of, to be able to socialize and have a shared understanding of what the current state is, as we got to a point where we also wanted to propose, here are some fulfillment scenarios. That was our kind of way into also getting some confidence in what we had learned from a range of internal and external stakeholders. And so this communication piece has also been key in our ability to kind of respond and figure out what is our best way of communicating complexities. And so our UX lead, who's Lucia, is a triple threat. She not only leads kind of our UX research and the strategy, and we input a lot to that, but she's also kind of a design expert. And so this kind of piece and way to be able to communicate the problem has been key to us. And here we are. This slide is really, we kind of call it transitioning alpha. Not necessarily what I'm showing here is in sequence of how we did it, but because we kind of, in the fall, we started to get into this briefing phase. You know, it was clear we were getting some momentum, we were getting some confidence, and so it started to get challenging to carve out time for ourselves to be able to dig into some problems and look at and figure out how we're going to prototype this thing. So we, instead of a week, we carved out 2 days, so 2-day chunks, probably about 3 or 4 sessions over the fall, and started to prototype what the thing could look like. And that, again, started to continue to build that conversation. And as an aside, what we also do is show and tells, which I'm sure a few of you here are familiar with, but that approach of, you know, showing the work and explaining the work consistently over a period of time and opening that up to a wide range of internal stakeholders and some kind of arm's length agencies that we were working with, kind of, you know, that understanding of what we were doing just continually built through the fall. And what Adelaide is doing, so our MTO partner on the top right, depending on where you're sitting, what we're doing there is just a crazy 8s exercise. So we had one of the solutions is, you know, creating a connection between dealerships today and staff at Service Ontario locations. And so that part of that net new interface, we're just kind of like, how can we come at this? Let's just do this activity where we just brainstorm and sort of swarm a problem. And so that's what we're doing there. This is, so in the fall, we also, because there's this fulfillment aspect of process change, you know, we were talking this morning, Rowan, that was a great session, but that, you know, thinking entrepreneurially and thinking about system change is pretty key to this whole, the puzzle that we're figuring out here. And so bringing this lean team in to, you know, get them an understanding along the journey as well. And we're using them. So we were at a Service Ontario public office just yesterday, co-designing with CSRs, and so they're part of that equation. Again, and blast over retrospectives, you know what that's all about. Key for us, we're still doing them. We're in a sprint. We are in a sort of 2-week sprint phase now, and so we continue to do those. Just wanted to touch on what I refer to as pickles. You know, we have messy situations. We have problems that when you kind of look at them super, you know, like there's all these problems. And we have some folks on the team who've been, you know, they've come from, you know, Service Ontario or places where you know, we talk about risk aversion. And so there's this problematizing. And if we can just kind of like reframe them as things that you can take a bite out of and you can put them in a jar and you can sort of figure out, by virtue of the Agile process, we're going to tackle this thing. This may seem big, we're going to figure that out after. And so the things, the kind of pickles for us are this spectrum of understanding of user research versus consultation. That was kind of a back and forth we had across the board in the fall. And so what we want to do as a team is try and navigate that, even though, you know, our minister offices may have an understanding of consultation, we want to navigate ourselves to, you know, we're doing user research. Design challenges, technical ambiguities, policies, legs and regs, all that stuff. And we sort of, you know, we've got a proposal, we'll get something out the door. And we may not solve all these things. We may have sort of a couple of pickle jars when we actually even launch this thing, but we'll figure them out. Not going to bump over that one. Just that, you know, these tools are available to us and we figure them out and use them as we want throughout the process. So maybe a Jira board is the way to go, but maybe it's just too chaotic, which is what it was in the fall. And so we used kind of a Kanban approach, and that worked for the team. So what's to come? We're in development sprints now. Obviously more usability, we'll just keep doing that. Really critical piece is you know, development effort is not inexpensive. There's an effort associated with that. So we want to make sure we've got our biggest bang for our buck when we start developing, and iterative releases when we're in beta. And that is the story. We are in exciting times. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I love those pickles. That's awesome. I'm sure you have questions for Sarah. Hopefully we'll get to those after our next couple of presenters. We'll have some time at the end. But now I want to call up our next speaker. Nick Scott is the Executive Director of Open Government and Innovation with the Government of New Brunswick. He's been leading public sector transformation work from both inside and outside government for the last 8 years. His team has done everything from establishing a collaborative workspace and public innovation framework to initiatives that address mobility, literacy, second language acquisition, natural resource development, municipal reform, and child protection. Please welcome Nick Scott.
Well, and that was my presentation. Thanks, Matt. I was at a panel recently, and I tried to tell a joke. I said, I've been in government for 21 years, and then everyone started to clap, and I was like, those are dog years. You're, okay, cool, all right. You're my people. I was at the wrong conference. I'm so glad I'm at the right conference now. Oh, do I get slides? I had slides. I started my timer, so I'm not going to go over. And let's chat. Me. No. 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 None of these are my slides. Yeah. Oh, that's me, though. Awesome. All right. Awesome, thanks. Cool, all right. Thanks for your patience. All right, that's me. I usually use a Bitmoji, which is a lot more fun. You can see that at the end of the slide. My friend says my Bitmoji looks more like me than I do, which is a lot of fun. All right, so this is Agile in Government without the tiers. I said without the code, so I think it's something that's a little bit different from my use case for the use case here in New Brunswick is we don't really start with it's like tech isn't the presumed solution, but we're trying to apply Agile in policy, program, service delivery approaches. And ultimately, we are trying to create the conditions where public servants can work in Agile ways. And that's the thing. So I think the real case study is in the way in which we went about developing the programs. But if I came here to do one thing and one thing only, is to share my daughter's sense of humor with you. She wrote this for me one time, and she says, the plan book is a book where you plan all of the plans that you need to plan. So if you need to plan something, plan it in this plan book, because the plan book is amazing for planning plans in. So if you are not here to plan a plan, then I must ask you to leave and buy another book to do things that aren't planning plans, because this is the book where you plan all your plans that need planning in this planning book. So if you have an idea of a plan that needs planning, go on through the pages of this planning book and plan all of your plans. Have a nice day. This is to give you a little bit of context of what it's like to work in government. She's ready. I think that the appeal of plans and documents and all of these things, though, is that they're tangible. They're tangible things that are of otherwise sort of intangible work that can seem intangible. And so what we've tried to do in our approach is really help make some of this work tangible. So it's the artifacts and these kinds of things. And so I'll get to some of that. In innovation and design service, we start with a space. We started with a program. We started with a culture and approach to doing things. And then we got a space once we demonstrated the value of a space that's not a cubicle or a boardroom. Right, and we did that actually by using a boardroom that was not used, and we took up residency in this boardroom. It was awful. It was in NB Liquor's warehouse, and it was like there were no windows. It was terrible. But we brought in 5 entrepreneurs from the craft alcohol sort of sector and 5 different government departments for 4 months. We convened to do some work together on how do we sort of support this sector. And I will get back to that. We run a bunch of services to sort of support this work in government. When I started, I was asked to, we need you to change the culture of government. I was like, okay. Do I have a team? No. Okay. Do I have a budget? No. I'm like, well, what can I do then? So I just started doing workshops. I was like, come on in, everybody. Let me basically do a book report for you, and we'll talk about that. That led to actually people saying, we want you to do some work with us. And so I was able to sort of kind of second people to priority projects that deputies wanted done. We then tried those out and we demonstrated, okay, cool, we actually need a space to facilitate this work in a more ongoing way. And so we basically have developed a series of workshops. We do an innovation challenge to network people who want to work differently, to have them actually practice in agile ways. We do design sprints now and project-based workshops, just trying to help people try out the tools, get familiar, because people, I think, they want to work differently, but doing the unfamiliar is very scary. And giving them the opportunity to try out things allows them to sort of become more familiar and be more able to do it in their day-to-day work. So Matt has already mentioned a bunch of the things that we have worked on. And I have a slightly adapted Agile Principles for policies, programs, and services. Basically, these things are soft like software, right? And it was super easy to adapt this to our work. Individuals' interactions over processes and tools. It really is about those relationships, as we've heard throughout the summit. Having working solutions over comprehensive documentation, like I said before, people are really wanting to produce reports. The challenge is, that's not the end thing, although we tend to feel like it is in government. And so we've found some ways to help out with that. Collaboration over consultation, which might be a slightly different view on things. Responding to change over following a plan, so my daughter would be very upset about that. And adoption over implementation. We started using this concept of adoption over implementation, because implementation kind of has this dynamic where I'm going to install a solution on you now, right? I'm going to push a solution, whereas adoption is trying to nurture a pull for the solution and adapting it to sort of new insights and new ideas. Sort of allowing your solution to be changed by new information and new insights. So from now on, it's just a bunch of pictures of our space, not because I want to sort of like fetishize the space, but because I didn't know what I was going to say until I got here. So that gives me a little bit of flexibility in what I'm doing. So where am I? I'm just kidding. I obviously wrote some notes down. Right. Oh yeah. So one of my favorite quotes from a participant is from our work in immigration. Thanks. It was a policy analyst who said, "I've worked in immigration policy for the last 10 years, and I understood the immigration process. But it wasn't until working alongside newcomers that I now have a better understanding of the experience." And this person now describes herself as a woke public servant, right? She's like, I get it now. This is different. So you do all kinds of unintentional harms when you take this institutional perspective. And so we create that opportunity for folks to work in teams alongside end users, not as sort of these subjects to mine for insight, but actually as partners in making the change that we all need to see in this work. So we convene the system. We apply various methodologies and theories to our work. We facilitate processes to help participants develop empathy with each other and end users, develop a shared understanding of the problems they're trying to solve, as well as the architecture that underlies those problems, what's propping them up. This is from the Craft Alcohol Policy Lab. On your left, this is what my colleagues thought the experience was for craft alcohol entrepreneurs to set up their companies. And when they showed this to the craft alcohol entrepreneurs, they said, yes, they all snickered. That's technically correct. That's textbook business startups. And then on the right, you have how they drew and described their work. There's a lot more nuance, and what we saw in there was there's a lot of stuff that our individual departments were not considering in it. And the main outcome from that was that the entrepreneurs no longer thought that government was trying to get in the way. And the government colleagues of mine no longer felt like, oh, these folks just don't want to abide by regulations, and they just want to make as much money as possible, not pay taxes. They realized that actually wasn't the case. So I'm going to still put up Instagram posts of my sticky notes. I don't care what anyone says, but it is not the end result of the work. And so when you're working with sort of end users, you're able to come with sort of better ideas, and we work with them to develop those. We have the space now where teams can come together. They work as a team, not a working group that works separately as individuals and then comes back together to share information, then goes back away, does their homework, and brings it back for months and months and sometimes years. And so so we don't always start with code, but we did build this one with the the folks who were looking at woodlots, private woodlots. The idea is that they want to increase the participation rate of private woodlot owners in the market, and so they came up with this. It was actually kind of a joke, and when they brought it to me, they were like, "We have an idea for an app. It's called Timber," and I was like, "Cool." And then we met, and I was like, "Oh, timber!" I had no idea what they were talking about until now. What this actually ended up doing was helping marketing boards start to rethink their role in this sort of value chain, right? That they could actually facilitate the connection between woodlot owners and contractors based on the values of the woodlot owners. Because right now, a lot of contractors default to clear cutting. But private woodlot owners, they want to use their woodlots in different ways. Sometimes they just want to do carbon capture, right? Sometimes they want to really do select cutting and have a some more sustainable way of doing things. The marketing board can now use this type of. They aren't going to use this, I don't think, but this helped them rethink it, and it gave them the sense of, okay, we can actually build things. It's actually not that hard, right? We did demystify tech in that way. And so, like the Ontario Digital Service principles, you want to test with deputy or ministers, right? So we try to get deputies at least and ADMs in, and this is what one of the ADMs had said. Marketing boards took a problem that would have taken months for an outside expert to consult DNR on and cut the required time to a fraction of that. The team's approach saw through opposing views to generate ideas that could be seen as reasonable by all. This work done in very short order has shined a bright light on some of the ugly corners of this problem, which will allow a heads-on approach to address them that have long plagued progress. So the idea, so in the end, at the stage that we're at, we're basically we're doing Agile to produce reports, right, in some ways, but behind all of that, there are new relationships, there are new ways of working, and there's new momentum for new solutions. So that's my time. That's all the hard stuff. Oh well, there's my Bitmoji. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Nick. Next up is Jeff Maher. Jeff Maher is a principal software developer with the Canadian Digital Service. He is also a product manager and user researcher who's worked in civic tech for the past decade. He is a former Code for America fellow, was an early member of the U.S. Digital Service, and has worked with several state-level digital service teams as a consultant. He's currently with CDS. Please welcome Jeff Maher.
I have to admit, I am a newcomer to the Canadian the Canadian civic tech scene, and as a newcomer, I hope that you'll all be my new civic tech friends. And I don't want to start off our friendship, our elbow bumping relationship on a bad note. So I want to start off with some raw honesty here. We're talking about Agile and government, and there are always tiers. Sometimes they're happy tiers, and you really hope that as you're actually delivering the services that people need, that there are many, many happy tiers to come. But Agile is about increasing the rate at change, and we as humans just have a lot of trouble with change. And that makes it really hard. There's going to be tiers, but hopefully you can get to a better place, even though those exist. So what is Agile? Nick had this really great slide that had the Agile Manifesto on it, and it's kind of like the religious doctrine of what that is. But it's like people over process and tools, collaborative teams over contracts, functional services over documentation and content, and responding to change over a plan in a giant plan book. To me, it means that we're able to meet people's needs in a timely fashion. And it looks a little bit like this very bland slide, which is an OODA loop. It's this like learn about the people that your agency or your organization is trying to serve. Also learn about the people inside of your agency that are delivering that service, and then do the smallest possible thing in order to improve it. And it's really important that this loop happens quickly, because it decreases a lot of things. It decreases the risk of, it decreases the cost, it decreases the risk of not meeting the need and making sure that the feedback that you're getting actually winds up in the service. It cuts down on a lot of the compliance theater that I'm sure we all experience. And also, we talked about all those tiers. It cuts down on that fear of change, because you're introducing smaller changes, even though it's happening more often. So a lot of my work with the Canadian Digital Service is trying to make these kinds of loops happen in government. But it has been kind of a core thing to my career thus far. So I want to do a little. I feel like it would be great if you're on a soap opera and the little clouds come in when you're doing a flashback. But I'm gonna go back to my days at the U.S. Digital Service, circa January 2015, and I want to talk a little bit about the context in which things were happening. So I was at the U.S. Digital Service and partnering with the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, which I'll affectionately refer to as the VA. The VA serves 20 million veterans, and in one of its flagship services is disability claims. So if you have a service-related injury and medical conditions that have made it difficult for you to lead your life, you can file a claim with the VA, and they'll give you compensation for it. Now, this number still makes me a little sick to my stomach, but in January 2015, there was a 1 million backlog, 1 million claim backlog. That's a lot of people that were not getting help. Then we'll go back to the VA, or actually let's come back to Canada real quick. When you look at the whole federal government in Canada, all of GC, there are 300,000 employees. The U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs is 400,000 employees and probably just as many contractors. When you think of when there are that many people, it means that you do have access to a lot of really amazing humans that are there for the mission, but it also means that you have many, many, many bathtubs of tears in your journey to change how things happen. So I was part of the U.S. Digital Service, and we came in those days, we very much had this kind of firefighting mission, come in and introduce structural changes to make sure that government services were no longer failing. So ours was around this claims processing, and we came in with this goal. It's reduce claims processing time by double-digit %. And this story is a little bit about trying to find the right conditions to work towards this goal. I hope I get the ugliest slide at the conference from this, but where we started was we had to do a lot of learning. what is claims processing? Why does a veteran file a claim? Who's a veteran? Who processes a claim? What's the legal framework in which somebody does or doesn't get money, or how much money do they get? So we had to learn all of those things and really do that kind of on-the-ground discovery. And then we kind of got to the question of like, okay, we know how to do this. How will we do it? What's the smallest thing that we can do to increase that processing time so that people can get the help that they need? And there were many options. The legal framework's actually really clear for how you adjudicate a claim, and you could turn it into if-then statements, which means you could probably automate things quickly. But people weren't very comfortable with that idea. Also, a big chunk of time that delayed the processing of a claim was getting all of the service and medical records from the Department of Defense to the VA. But the Department of Defense is like multiple times bigger than the VA, and even a harder place to change how they do business. And then in the VA, there wasn't the concept of kind of a single service owner around this. And there was this notorious software called VBMS, which is kind of the claims processing system that both was incredibly slow, crashed. It's basically like a $200 million, like a year PDF reader that crashes every third PDF that you open. And it's like, oh, can we just make it read PDFs better? And that might like make everything faster. And then the other thing too was there was no like real workflow around this software. Like the way people knew to go into the system and actually do something was all ancillary to the software itself. So maybe we could have done something there. But we got to this question of, can we improve things? Can we like lay down this iterative, nimble infrastructure to make sure that claims are happening better now and in the future? And we just kept running into no. We had the buy-in from the people at the top of the agency, but there were many, many layers of people that were not willing to come off their like, get your requirements in and then ship your feature 2 years later. And a lot of people that looked at us as like late 20s and early 30s somethings people and being like, I've been doing this for 30 years. Who are you to come in and tell me to do anything differently? And we couldn't do that. We were wasting a lot of time, and we started to have to say like, no, we can't do this here. But our discovery process was still fruitful. We found a shadow backlog of another 1.5 million claims that were sitting there. And these were appealed claims. So when somebody didn't get the decision they wanted, they could appeal it. And there were many, many things sitting behind this. And this was actually a very similar problem, except that it was happening in a totally different part of the VA. It's like, oh, well, if we solve it here, maybe that could actually someday turn into like that iterative, like constantly improving thing on the original claims process. And we found stakeholders that were just so deeply moved by the mission and really, really, really wanted to help veterans. Also, their budget was like many orders of magnitude smaller than the other claims process, which made them really excited about a new possible solution and trying to do business differently. So that was where we found this environment where we could start doing that. But there was still some stuff that we had to approve. The Board of Appeals, which was the part of the VA in which this happened, they had kind of a not so great vendor that was kind of leading them down not such a great road. So we had to kind of unwind them. But we also had to talk about they were very worried about this Agile thing. I remember I showed my like original slide with the learn do, and I was supposed to talk about that for 2 hours, and I was like, that's like what we're gonna do, and it terrified them. Fortunately, I had a coworker, Kavi Harshwat, who gracefully came in and showed them that Agile is not having a plan. It's just that like we're gonna plan the process in which we do it. We just can't tell you what we're gonna build ahead of time. And he did a lot of really amazing groundwork to convince them that this was actually lower risk than what they were doing, and helped kind of quantify that the status quo was more costly and not gonna meet the veterans' needs. So once we did that, kind of unwound the vendor, we had to bring people along. I won't go into too much detail here because Sarah had such great content on this. We did a lot of the same things where we went and did user research with the people that were processing the benefits. Then we pulled them into our like KJ activity, like sticky notes, to generate ideas. And then we built a prototype like days later. And and people inside the government were amazed that their ideas and the way that they were working were actually going to be in the software that they were going to use to do their jobs. Additionally, we pulled in all the executives and had them do user testing, where they'd watch the processing staff use both the old software and the new software. And what wound up happening after we really had that buy-in was that we started I don't want to say replacing the legacy software, but we started replacing the legacy workflow, the legacy process in which appealed claims were handled. And each time we were able to kind of knock off another part and show that it was actually making things better, it just increased the amount of buy-in that we got, and we were able to take on more stuff. So. With that said, this is a very abbreviated version of the story. I would love to answer questions or talk with you afterwards. The thing that I want to end with is, again, to remind you, I'm at the Canadian Digital Service and that we are hiring for 2 really important positions. One is the head of software development and the other is head of internal ops. So please come talk to me or my amazing colleagues over there in the corner if you want to come and help make Canada even better. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I think we have about 15 minutes for question and answer, which is fantastic. So who has a question for our panel? Yeah, please.
Thank you. My question is, how do you teach other people how Agile works as a process, as something that you do, versus all the terms and buzzwords? I think, demonstrating it and being the Agile person in the room, it can be hard to see that intangible kind of skill. Any methods or tips, and how you did that well in your different roles?
Thank you. I love that question, and I was going to talk about it, but I ran out of time because my daughter's so funny. For me, seeing is believing, so that's one thing. So just show, don't tell is part of it. But I think experiential learning. We started with just trying to do presentations and workshops, but at the end of the day, it's actually just going through the experience with people that they really then understand it, and then the terminology comes later. Really, you don't really get caught up on that.
I'd say living it makes the difference for sure. Just starting to do the work and bring however many people you can into the process and bring them along for the ride.
Yeah, ditto on all of that. I think the other thing is just telling, as you're doing it, particularly when you're in environments where people are resistant to it, just talking to them about how it's going to meet the outcomes in which they desire, and also and measuring it is a really big part of it. Being able to show that you're making things better, kind of in a nimble fashion as you work side by side with them using those practices.
Thank you. Who else has a question? Nobody? I have a question. What do you think is the biggest misconception people have about Agile and government? What's a myth or a widely held belief that you think is just kind of wrong or unfounded?
I'll be honest, I don't have a ton of experience working in Agile in government, right? The last year is my only year. I've heard kind of, you're a little bit tonally, things like more sort of expectations, like it's a template, it's a way of, it's a prescribed, there's a menu. Agile is by definition, it's flexible. And so I think that's there's that sort of a little tone of misconceptions about what that means. Has been my experience today. Yeah.
I think one of the areas of mythology is that there are many like religious denominations of Agile, like Scrum being one of them, like extreme programming, and all those. And I think when I've seen governments, sometimes they'll take on one of these very like hardcore extremist factions of Agile. They become very dogmatic about the structure in which they do it, and in some cases that structure doesn't actually work. It's actually even more waterfall-y than waterfall. So I think when people think that Agile is just scrums and using a ticketing board and whatnot, I think they don't realize that it's about responding to change and working on what's the most important thing right now and not necessarily the most urgent thing.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I think maybe a myth would be that it's more risky than waterfall, and that waterfall like gives you the illusion of certainty, and therefore it feels less risky. But I think, yeah, the risk is actually in that sort of the rigidity, not the rigor, but in the rigidity of some other approaches. And so if you start to take the zealous view of Agile, you end up adding rigidity to it as opposed to rigor.
Thank you. Yeah, question in the back.
Building on your question, as a bit of an Agile thinker, one of the myths I've heard is that you have to have dedicated teams. Can you guys talk about whether that's true for you, or I'm loud enough?
Thank you.
So the question is, do you have to have a dedicated team to do Agile?
So my experience is not that you don't have to have the dedicated team. You saw we started our team last year with 3 who were dedicated, but 3 who were not. And the 3 who were not were really critical, brains and on our team and connection into the organization. So as a leader on that team, my take on that is how are we going to respond to, how are we going to approach this in an Agile kind of way? How are we going to be flexible and bring those people in a way that is allows us to do the work that we've been tasked to do? And so, we could approach that by setting up regular checkpoints, like let's work together to figure out what the cadence of effort is going to look like. So can we carve out, 2 hours every Tuesday afternoon where we can count on you to be part of this team? And that's worked for us so far.
I totally understand. I totally understand that notion. Like I'm thinking back to like times in the past where I've been on an Agile team and like pre-cloud days. It's like, oh well, we need to like file a support ticket with IT in order to get a server, in order to be able to deploy the thing we're building, and they did not move in kind of an Agile fashion in the sense that what they worked on was like first in, first out. And an Agile team is just constantly reprioritizing what it's working on based on what's most important. And I think that when you have organizations that prioritize work differently, that's where you see the conflict more than necessarily like an Agile team versus a waterfall team. And I think that, like what you're saying, Sarah, like being able to like have a conversation with teams that do prioritize their work differently is really a big way of making sure that your Agile practice can still work, even if another team does it differently.
Thank you so much. I think that's our time. Thank you so much for joining us. And we have a last round of applause for our brave panelists.